My name is Margaret Caldwell, and 3 weeks after my husband's funeral, I opened a letter that told me I didn't exist. It came from the insurance company, neat logo cream envelope, the kind of mail you don't open right away, because you already know what it's about. But that morning, I made coffee for one sat down at the kitchen table that still had his reading glasses on it and tore the flap. The words were polite, even kind. "Thank you for updating your beneficiary information, Mrs. Caldwell. The problem was, I hadn't." I read it 3 times before I felt my heartbeat in my teeth. The date on the letter was April 21st. Thomas had died April 7th. I called the number printed at the bottom hands, shaking so hard I had to dial twice. The man on the other end sounded too young to be holding the edge of my world in his voice. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm showing here the updated beneficiary as Marjorie Kane." My breath caught. "Who?" He hesitated, shuffling papers. "It looks like the change was processed right after the death certificate was filed. Everything seems to be in order." I wanted to scream that nothing was in order. Not my house, not my heart, not the idea that someone could rewrite my life in ink. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at Thomas's desk, surrounded by the hum of the refrigerator and the smell of his cologne fading from the air. I found a folder labeled Insurance Documents. Inside was the last copy of the policy I'd signed 20 years ago, with my name clearly printed as the only beneficiary. There was no mention of any change. The next morning, I drove to the insurance office in Bloomington. The receptionist had the kind of smile that comes with script training. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, before asking for my ID. I waited in a vinyl chair that hissed when I moved, watching a muted TV play morning talk shows about spring cleaning. When they finally called me in, a man in a gray tie handed me a photocopy of the updated policy. My name was there, but the handwriting wasn't mine. Every loop, every letter looked familiar enough to be insulting. I had never felt so violated by ink. "This was notarized," he said, pointing to a stamp. "It's legal. Who notarized it?" He leaned closer, squinting. "Kane and Associates Consulting. Looks like a private firm." The name hit me like static. Thomas used to mention a woman named Marjorie Kane, someone who handled tax paperwork for his company. I remembered a Christmas card from her once signed, "Warm regards, Marjorie." I had thought she was just another colleague. I left the office with copies of every page, gripping them like evidence. The cold air outside bit through my coat, but my body felt hotter with each step. Betrayal had a way of burning, even when the person who caused it was already in the ground. That evening, I called Thomas's old business partner, Greg. His voice cracked when I mentioned Marjorie. "She still runs her consulting firm," he said, but Thomas stopped working with her a while back. Something about unprofessional billing. Why I told him. He went quiet for a long time before whispering, "Margaret, check your husband's office drawers." I did, and at the back of the bottom drawer, beneath tax receipts and old birthday cards, I found a yellowed envelope labeled Kane Consulting. Inside, invoices, a thank you note in Marjorie's elegant handwriting, and a check stub dated just months before Thomas died. The handwriting on that note matched the signature on the insurance form exactly. It wasn't grief I felt then. It was something colder, sharper. The kind of clarity that replaces tears with purpose. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat at the same table where that cursed letter had started it all, and stared at my forged name until the ink seemed to move. Whoever thought they could steal what Thomas and I built, they didn't know me yet. They would. The following days felt like walking through fog. I could see the outlines of my life, but none of it made sense anymore. Thomas had been the organized one, the man who kept every receipt, who balanced the checkbook down to the cent. The idea that someone else had stepped into his paperwork and stolen what was left of him and me was unbearable. I needed answers, not sympathy. So I started with the only clue I had: Kane and Associates Consulting. The name sounded respectable, local, maybe even harmless. The kind of office you'd drive by 100 times without noticing. I found it on Main Street, tucked between a dentist and a thrift store. A brass plaque on the door read, Marjorie A. Kane, Certified Document Consultant. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and copy paper. The walls were lined with motivational quotes about honesty and trust. A young assistant in a navy blouse looked up. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "I'm looking for Ms. Kane." After a few minutes, a woman appeared from the back room, mid-40s. Tidy blonde hair, the kind of confidence that comes from thinking no one will ever question you. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said warmly. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I worked with Thomas years ago. Such a kind man." Her voice was honey, but I heard the hum underneath the hum of someone calculating. "I appreciate that," I said. "I'm just trying to understand some paperwork issues. The insurance company told me your office notarized a form with my signature on it." Marjorie blinked once, then smiled again. "Oh dear, that must be a mix-up. We notarize dozens of documents every week. I'm sure it's procedural." "Maybe," I said, and handed her a photocopy of the policy. She took it, scanning with the ease of someone who's used to reading other people's secrets. Then, like a reflex, she reached for a pen. I watched her hand move smooth, looping, graceful. The same rhythm I'd seen on the forged page. "Nice handwriting," I said quietly. She froze for a second. The smile stayed, but the air in the room changed, heavier, tighter. "Well," she said, "setting down the pen if you'd like, I can double-check our records." "I'd appreciate that." She disappeared into the back, leaving me alone with a desk full of papers. My fingers itched to open the drawers, but I didn't. Not yet. I was here to observe, not accuse. When she returned, she held a printed log and pointed to a line near the bottom. "See, it was notarized here on April 9th. "April 9th, I said. "Thomas died on the 7th. Her smile didn't falter, but her throat moved as she swallowed. "Sometimes the dates overlap with mail delays," she said lightly. "It's nothing unusual." I thanked her, pocketed the copy she gave me, and left. The cold outside hit me like clarity. On the drive home, I stopped by the courthouse. The clerk, a gray-haired woman named Pauline, pulled the public record for Kane and Associates. "Funny," she said, tapping the page. Her notary license expired 2 years ago. Never renewed. I stared at the seal on my copy again, fresh, sharp, official-looking. That night, I spread everything on my dining table: the insurance forms, Thomas's old invoices, Marjorie's card, the forged signature that mocked my name. I took photos, labeled each one, slid them into clear sleeves. Grief had turned into purpose. If Marjorie thought she could bury her crime under paperwork, she'd picked the wrong widow to fool. I woke up the next morning before sunrise. The house was cold, but the coffee pot gurgled like an old friend trying to keep me company. The light on the table hit the folder labeled Kane, Consulting, and for a moment I just stared at it, as if the answers might rise out of the paper on their own. Thomas's handwriting filled the margins of most of the document's notes, initials, little reminders. He always wrote in blue ink. But on one invoice near the bottom, I noticed something different. A black pen and a signature that wasn't quite his. The T curved wrong. The line underneath slanted left instead of right. I compared it to his old check stubs. Someone had tried to copy him and failed. I made a list of everything I had: the forged insurance form, the expired notary stamp, and now a suspicious invoice. My next step was to find a connection. I drove to the small library in town, the kind with wood paneling and a faint smell of dust and optimism. The librarian, Mrs. Heller, had known me since grade school. When I told her I needed old business directories, she didn't ask why, just pointed me toward the archives. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Kane and Associates Consulting had been registered 8 years ago, but the business license showed inactive since last year. No taxes filed, no renewals. Still invoices in Thomas's files dated only a few months before his death. That meant someone was still operating under that name illegally. I called Greg Thomas's old business partner again. "She ever work out of your office?" I asked. "Only once or twice," he said. Thomas didn't like her around after she overbilled a client. He told me he was cutting her off. Why she might have forged his paperwork. There was a long silence. Then Greg said, "Margaret, if you're right, she didn't just steal money. She committed insurance fraud. That's prison time." I hung up and called Mr. Lowell, the retired lawyer who'd handled our will years ago. His secretary remembered me, the nice woman with the blue cardigan. He agreed to meet that afternoon. Lowell's office smelled of old books, and lemon polish like time itself had been organized into drawers. He listened quietly as I laid out the documents. "You're thorough," he said, adjusting his glasses. "This is more evidence than most police reports start with. But you need one thing proof that she sent that form herself. The notarized version is digital. If we can trace the upload to her IP address, we can prove intent." "How do we get that?" I asked. "You'll need a formal request through the state's insurance commission. I can help draft it." He looked at me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You remind me of my wife. Once she decided something was wrong, no one slept until it was fixed." That night, I drove home under a sky so clear, it looked like it had been scrubbed clean. The world felt sharp again. Edges, corners. Consequences. At home, I went through Thomas's old computer. It still worked, humming softly, like it knew I needed it. I searched for any email exchange with Marjorie. Dozens came up. Most were routine tax updates, insurance renewals, mundane things. But one stood out. Dated March 31st, subject line, "Policy Adjustment Confirmation." The email was brief. "Thomas, per your note, I've attached the updated beneficiary form for your wife to sign. Please return it after April 10th for processing." That date. April 10th. 3 days after he died. The attachment was a blank form, the same format used in the forged version. I felt my stomach drop. She had prepared it ahead of time, probably planning to send it after he passed, counting on my grief to keep me from noticing. I saved the file, printed the email, and slipped both into my growing binder labeled Evidence. For the first time since Thomas's funeral, I felt steady. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was building a case. Before going to bed, I took one last look at the handwriting sample. The loops, the pressure, the precision, it was unmistakably hers, and tomorrow I was going to get more. 2 days later, I stood in front of Kane and Associates again, clutching my purse like armor. The early spring air still bit at my cheeks, but inside that office, the heat of my anger was enough to keep me steady. This time I came with a plan. I had called ahead pretending to be interested in consulting services for estate planning. Marjorie seemed delighted. "Of course, Mrs. Caldwell. We're always happy to help widows navigate the paperwork. Why don't you come by Thursday afternoon?" Her tone was sugar, but I could taste the lie underneath. I wore a gray blazer and the same pearl earrings I'd worn to Thomas's funeral, the ones he bought me on our 20th anniversary. They made me feel protected somehow. When I arrived, she greeted me with that same warm professionalism, as if she'd never seen my name printed on a forged document in her life. The office looked identical to before, except this time, I noticed every detail. The brand of her pens, the file cabinet's lock, the security camera above the door that probably hadn't worked in years. We sat across from each other at her desk. She poured coffee into mismatched mugs, one read "Boss Lady" in gold script. So she began crossing one leg over the other. "How can I help you today?" I smiled. "I just need guidance about beneficiary forms. You know, insurance wills, that kind of thing. My husband handled most of it, and now I'm a little lost." Her eyes softened, maybe from guilt, maybe from confidence. "Of course. It's a lot to take on after everything. Do you still have your husband's policy?" "Yes," I said, "but it's complicated. Someone made changes I didn't authorize." She tilted her head, playing innocent. "Oh no, that must be so stressful." I reached into my bag and slid out a blank form I'd printed the night before, the same type used in the insurance file. "Can you show me where a notary would sign this?" She took it without hesitation, uncapped her pen, and wrote in a neat, looping signature across the sample line. I felt a chill run through me. Her handwriting was perfect. The same graceful M, the same swooping tail on the E. "Nice handwriting," I said softly, pretending to admire it. She looked up, and there it was. A flicker, a shift. The warmth drained from her face for half a second before she caught it and smiled again. "Old habit," she said. "My mother made me practice cursive for hours." I smiled back, but inside I was screaming. When I left her office, I walked straight to Mr. Lowell's car parked around the corner. He'd insisted on waiting there in case anything went wrong. I handed him the paper through the window. "Got it?" he asked. "She signed it herself," I said. "Same hand, same style." He looked at the form, whistled low. "This is gold, Margaret. We'll get this analyzed by a handwriting expert." That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt amplified: the ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, even the faint creak of the front porch. I wasn't afraid. I was wired. Adrenaline had replaced grief. At midnight, I sat at the kitchen table with my binder open, sorting everything in chronological order. I labeled sections: the forgery, the timeline, the witnesses. It looked almost like a courtroom exhibit. I kept replaying that flicker in her eyes, the tiny shift when she realized I knew. It was more satisfying than I wanted to admit. The next morning, I met Mr. Lowell at his office. He had already called a forensic document examiner from Indianapolis, a woman named Elaine Porter. She was retired from the FBI and now freelanced for legal firms. Elaine examined both signatures, the one from Marjorie's office and the one from the forged policy. "They're a match," she said without hesitation. No question. The ink pressure, the slant, even the tremor on the downward stroke, same writer. Lowell smiled. "That's what we needed." "Now what?" I asked. "Now we file a complaint with the State Insurance Bureau," he said. "But I want to do something first. I want to give her a chance to explain on record." "On record?" He nodded. "You're going to talk to her again, Margaret. Calm, polite like before, but this time I'll be recording." The thought made my stomach twist, but I agreed. That evening, I sat in my car outside Kane & Associates, watching the last rays of sunlight hit the glass door. For a long moment, I thought about Thomas, about the way he'd trusted people, the way he'd always believed paperwork couldn't lie. Then I turned on the recorder in my pocket and walked toward the door. The bell over the office door jingled as I stepped inside. The same air freshener lavender and something too sweet hit me in the face. Marjorie looked up from her desk, startled, then smiled that professional smile again. "Mrs. Caldwell. Back so soon." "I just had a few more questions," I said, keeping my tone even. "I hope it's not a bad time." "Not at all." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit." I sat. The small recorder in my pocket was already running its red light hidden by my scarf. I kept my hands folded to keep from trembling. "I've been going through some of Thomas's files," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. I found this one labeled Kane Consulting. Looks like you two work together quite a bit." Her smile stayed, but her eyes flickered. "Oh, yes. Years ago, I helped him with tax audits." "Right," I said, "and with insurance paperwork." She hesitated for half a beat too long. "Occasionally, yes." "Then you must remember this." I pulled out the forged insurance form, the one with my name written in her hand, and laid it gently on the desk. Her face went blank. For a moment she didn't blink. Then she gave a light laugh. "Oh, that must be a mistake." "My assistant." "There's no assistant," I said. "I checked your business license. It's been inactive for 2 years." Her hand twitched. I leaned in slightly. "You forged my signature. You stole the payout. You used my husband's death to make yourself rich." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Just a soft, strangled breath. "I don't want excuses, Marjorie," I said quietly. "I want the truth." Something cracked then, maybe in her, maybe in the silence between us. Her voice came out flat. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "Go that far," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You falsified documents. You impersonated a widow. You took money meant for my husband's burial and called it business." She wiped her hands down her skirt. "You don't understand. Thomas told me he was going to change the policy anyway. He said you didn't care about money. He said..." "He said what?" She froze again. The lie tripped halfway out of her mouth. I pulled a small photo from my purse, one of Thomas and me from our anniversary trip. "That's the man you helped, right? The one who trusted you." Her eyes dropped to the desk. "He was kind," she whispered. "He always treated me with respect." "Respect doesn't pay your bills, though, does it?" She didn't answer. Outside, a car horn honked, jolting her. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said suddenly. I thought it would go unnoticed. You'd have the house, the savings." I stood up slowly. "You thought wrong." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "The State Insurance Bureau will contact you. I've filed a complaint. You might want to get a lawyer." Her eyes widened. "You can't prove." "Oh, I can," I said. "You see, I learned something from my husband. He kept every receipt." She looked at me, then really looked and realized what I meant. That folder on the desk wasn't just paper. It was her undoing. I turned to leave. At the door, I paused. "By the way," I said softly, "I still think your handwriting's beautiful. Shame what it'll look like on a confession." Her face drained of color. Outside, the wind hit me cold and sharp, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I walked straight to Mr. Lowell's car, handed him the recorder, and said, "She talked." He grinned. "Then we're done waiting." The next morning, he sent the recording and our documentation to the Insurance Commission and the Sheriff's Office. By evening, a detective named Harris called me to confirm they were opening an investigation. When I hung up, I sat on the porch and watched the streetlights blink on one by one. The world was finally tilting back toward fairness. Not justice yet, but close. Inside the house, Thomas's picture sat on the mantel half in shadow. For the first time since his death, I spoke out loud to it. "You'd better believe I'm finishing this, Tom. For both of us." And for the first time, I felt like he might have heard me. Detective Harris called 2 mornings later. His tone was calm, measured, but there was an energy underneath the kind police officers get when they know something's about to break. "Mrs. Caldwell, we've confirmed the document was uploaded from Marjorie Kane's office computer," he said. "Our cyber unit traced the metadata. We'll bring her in for questioning this afternoon." I thanked him, but when I hung up, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't fear, it was the strange tremor of victory I hadn't earned yet. By noon, Mr. Lowell called. "You don't have to come in," he said, "but if you'd like to make a statement..." It might help solidify the case. I drove to the sheriff's office in silence, the radio off my fingers, gripping the steering wheel. It was the same drive Thomas used to take every spring when he renewed his business permits. Funny how the same roads could lead to such different endings. When I walked in, Detective Harris met me at the door. "She's here," he said. "We read her the Miranda warning. She's not denying it, but she's not talking much either." Through a small window in the hallway, I saw her sitting at a metal table, hands folded, eyes blank. Her hair was pinned up neatly, as if she'd dressed for a job interview. "She forged my signature," I said quietly. "Yes," Harris replied. "And she used the fake business account to reroute the funds. We'll recover what's left." I nodded, though what I really wanted was to understand why. Later that day, Harris asked if I wanted to sit in on the questioning. He said I didn't have to speak, just observe. I agreed. When I stepped into the room, Marjorie's eyes flicked toward me. For the first time, I saw something besides control. Fear. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said softly. "I just thought—" "You thought I wouldn't notice?" I asked. Her eyes welled up. "He promised me he'd change it. Thomas said he'd make it official. I thought I was just following through." "Thomas didn't promise you anything," I said. My voice surprised me, calm, even, but heavy. "He trusted you to handle his paperwork, not to take his life's work." She looked down. "I'm sorry." "No," I said. "You're sorry you got caught." The room went still. Even Harris stopped writing. Afterward, he escorted me out. "We'll charge her with fraud and forgery," he said. "It'll take time, but the system's on your side here." I went home, poured myself a glass of water, and sat on the porch as the evening light turned everything gold. I thought of Thomas, how he believed honesty always came out in the end. Maybe it did, but it needed a little help from people like me. That night, I wrote a letter to the insurance bureau thanking them for reopening the claim. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about dignity, about putting my name, my real name, back where it belonged. Weeks passed. The investigation unfolded quietly. Harris kept me updated. Marjorie confessed after 2 more interviews. She'd been drowning in debt, behind on her mortgage, desperate to borrow the money until she could pay it back. Of course, she never could. When the official letter arrived confirming restitution, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, like someone who had been holding her breath for months and finally exhaled. The next Sunday, I went to church for the first time since Thomas's funeral. People smiled at me, cautious, kind smiles that said, "We heard what you did." During the hymn, I caught myself singing again. My voice cracked, but it was there. Later, I stood in the small cemetery behind the church, tracing Thomas's name on the headstone. "It's over," I whispered. "She can't touch us anymore." The wind rustled through the oak trees, carrying the faint scent of lilac from the hill. I closed my eyes and let the peace settle in. I didn't just get justice, I got my life back. The settlement check arrived on a Thursday morning, folded inside an unassuming white envelope, no different from any other piece of mail. But when I held it in my hands, it felt heavier than paper. It felt like closure. The insurance company's letter was short. "We apologize for the distress caused by this incident. Your rightful benefits have been restored." I read it twice, not for the words themselves, but for what they meant, that my husband's name, my name, had finally been cleared. Still, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to comfort me, but now felt like a reminder of everything gone. Justice is a strange thing. It doesn't fill the empty chair at the table or make the coffee taste the same. I decided to do something Thomas would have done, put the money to good use. The next day, I drove to the county courthouse to sign papers establishing the Caldwell Fund for Widows' Legal Aid, a small grant to help women in Indiana who'd been victims of document fraud or financial abuse. I used part of the settlement to start it, and I asked Mr. Lowell to sit on the advisory board. He agreed without hesitation. "You turned pain into purpose, Margaret," he said, handing me the final notarized form. "That's rarer than justice these days." That night, as the wind moved through the maple trees outside, I sat with a cup of tea and thought about Marjorie Kane. I wondered where she was county jail, probably awaiting sentencing. I didn't wish her harm. In some strange way, I pitied her. She'd let greed carve out her conscience until nothing was left but survival. A few weeks later, Detective Harris stopped by to return the binder of evidence. "You might want to keep this," he said, "just for the record." He hesitated before leaving. "Mrs. Caldwell, most people would have walked away after the first letter. You didn't." "I didn't have a choice," I said. "When someone takes your name, they take your story. I just took mine back." After he left, I set the binder on the shelf beside Thomas's photo, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what truth costs and what it gives back. Months passed. The leaves turned, the nights grew longer, and the world moved on. The gossip faded, and people stopped asking about the case. But something inside me had changed. I began volunteering once a week at the community center, helping older women read and organize their financial documents. Some of them had lost husbands, too. Some had never even signed a contract in their own name. One afternoon, a woman named Carol hugged me after I helped her file a complaint against her late husband's debt collector. "You've got fire in you," she said. I smiled. Maybe I told her. But it burns cleaner now. That night, I recorded my first story for the local radio's Life After Loss segment. They'd asked widows to share lessons learned through hardship. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I spoke. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means acknowledging the scar and still choosing to live. I thought revenge was about punishment, but I learned it's about reclaiming what was stolen, not just money, but peace. And sometimes peace looks like helping the next woman who gets that letter in the mail. When the recording aired, a neighbor stopped by with flowers. "You made us all think," she said. "You turned something ugly into something we can learn from." That evening, I stood by the window watching the porch light flicker on. Thomas always used to say the light should never go out. Even if no one's coming home, he'd laugh. It's good to keep hope visible. So I kept it on, every night. Not for him, not for me, but for anyone who'd ever been lied to in ink. And if they drove by Maple Street at dusk, they'd see that little house with the soft light glowing through the curtains, and maybe they'd think she made it through. Because I did.